This is Canadian MGTOW. Having fun, and not giving a shit. Here in Canada, the Canadian government just donated $300,000 to the White Ribbon campaign to end violence against women. The funding will be used for a 36-month White Ribbon campaign across Canada to try to end violence against women, Kelly Leitch, federal minister responsible for the status of women, announced Friday. Not a penny was dedicated to ending violence against men, though. A Canadian man, Earl Silverman, committed suicide in 2013 because he couldn't get a penny for the men's shelter he was running with his own money from this same government. Quoting from the National Post's article on Earl Silverman's suicide, the man who created Canada's only shelter dedicated solely to male victims of domestic violence died on Friday of an apparent suicide. Mr. Silverman closed his shelter last month, saying he could no longer afford its upkeep. He long sought funding from provincial and federal governments to help run his hybrid shelter and home, but believed he was always refused because the space was dedicated to helping male victims and their children. He said he was unable to pay for heat and grocery bills. Mr. Silverman's home, also the site of the men's alternative safe house, MSH, had to be sold. He had run the sanctuary out of his own funds, but failed to raise any significant amount from government or even private donations. The day after he was to move out, Earl Silverman was found hanging in the garage. Several weeks prior to his death, he told the Post that he himself had been the victim of abuse at the hands of his ex-wife. Mr. Silverman said, "When I went into the community looking for some support services, I couldn't find any. There were a lot for women, and the only programs for men were for anger management. As a victim, I was re-victimized by having these services telling me that I wasn't a victim, but I was a perpetrator." Mr. Silverman left a 4-page-long suicide note blaming the government for failing to recognize male victims of domestic abuse. "As I wrote this, I couldn't help but think of my dentist. His practice has grown in the last 30 years, and is in a rather large building that holds 3 other dental practices and easily a team of 20 hygienists. Across the street is an even bigger building. It is a battered women's shelter which was built from scratch. Who knows how many civil servants are employed there?" According to the Public Health Agency of Canada, domestic violence affects men and women almost equally. Statistics Canada first collected data on intimate partner abuse of both men and women through its 1999 General Social Survey, GSS. Respondents were asked 10 questions concerning abuse by their current and/or previous spouses and common law partners during the 12-month and 5-year periods preceding the telephone interview. According to their responses, almost equal proportions of men and women, 7% and 8% respectively, had been the victims of intimate partner physical abuse. Psychological abuse was 18% and 19% respectively. These findings were consistent with several earlier studies which reported equal rates of abuse by women and men in intimate relationships. This means, StatsCan said, that roughly 653,000 women and 546,000 men considered themselves the victims of violence at the hands of a current or previous spouse or common law partner, an estimate that was unchanged from an earlier study. And yet, $300,000 is spent focusing only on ending domestic violence against women. Sounds a lot like feminism. Working on equality while only focusing on one gender. Go figure. According to recent research by Denise Hines, a professor of psychology at Clark University in Massachusetts, is that men are often confronted with higher standards of proof when they make a complaint. All 3 of the institutions that Hines studied, assault hotlines, domestic violence agencies and police, blatantly told the men that it was somehow their fault and that they must have been the real batterer, she says. Just as the alleged shortcomings of a female partner should never be used as a rationalization for violence against women, the same should be true when the situation is reversed. I can't accept any notion that gives women a different moral or legal standing when it comes to domestic violence. For Erin Pizet, who founded the world's first shelter for battered women in 1971, the reality of female violence against men was readily apparent without a 5-year study. She states of the first 100 women who came into my refuge, 62 were as violent or more violent than the men that they were leaving. This was not a gender issue. Interestingly, she mentioned that men will often not seek help, the reason being men will not see women for what they are, human like everyone else, is the male need to put women on the pedestal. MGTOW refuses to put women on a pedestal and all forms of chivalry, so as our movement grows, it may just well influence someone to get the help they need. We know that feminism sure won't. They refuse to see domestic violence as a human issue, they insist on seeing it as a political issue. Everything is driven on this hatred of men. So if the government won't take its own domestic violence statistics seriously, just what will it take to break the stranglehold of the feminist-driven domestic violence industry? They could really learn something from whiteribbon.org. It is a website that was created to be objective when it came to domestic violence, unlike whiteribbon.com. Its message is simple. End violence against everyone. That campaign is 100% volunteer-based. One commenter stated that the publicly available financial documents of whiteribbon.com shows that 11 of its staff earns more than $500,000 a year, and contributes nothing to victim services. This concludes this article. If you enjoyed this video, please comment, rate and subscribe. Thank you. This is Canadian MGTOW, signing off. Save yourself. Go MGTOW. P.S. If you are a male victim of domestic violence in Canada, there are few services designed specifically for abused men. However, support may be available from the following organizations, many of which are listed among the emergency services on or near the first page of your local telephone directory.